Imagine exactly 170,000 years past. You are humankind, hardly identifiable as such, yet true. You rise up, extend, gaze across toward the African savanna, and at absolutely 0 times do you feel you realize what could truly finalize this sunrise: trousers. But still, here we exist. Millions of individuals, each new sunrise pulling on slacks or kilts or whatever you name this item that's officially nightwear, yet you've kept wearing for 3 days solid, and you're naming it activewear now, since that feels deliberate. Garments are so woven into human existence that we actually detain people for not donning them. Ponder upon that for one moment. The government will intervene if you're too exposed. We forged an entire legal framework around the premise of kindly put something on. We enforce rules regarding nudity as a species. This is where we stand. Yet why? When did this begin? And more crucially, why did we do it when basically every other creature on the globe just didn't? Hounds don't wear outfits. Coyotes don't wear apparel. The elephant, which is objectively smarter than most humans you went to high school alongside, has never once pondered, "I need a jacket for this." The brief answer is, we have no clue exactly when it occurred. The deep answer is way more captivating and slightly weird, and it involves lice, which, spoiler, is not as nasty as it sounds. Truly, it is. It's exactly as nasty as it sounds. But stick with me, because the lice topic is genuinely one of the most unusual and fascinating pieces of evolutionary detective work in all of biology. Let's head back toward the starting. The hairless ape dilemma. Here's something society speaks about rarely. Humans are essentially the sole large mammals on Earth that are nearly hairless. Seriously pause and think about that biologically for a second. Gorillas? Covered. Orangutans? Covered. Bears, tigers, foxes, horses, elephants, rhinos, all of them across wildly different environments and climates, are walking around in full coats. And then there's us, standing in the middle of all this biodiversity, just bare, a bit uneven, oddly pink in some places, sporting an evolutionary vibe that states, "I used to have fur, but I made some choices." Researchers hold a few theories for why we shed our fur in the first place. The most popular one is the thermoregulation hypothesis. Basically, as our forefathers moved from jungles to open grasslands and started running long distances to hunt, being covered in thick fur became a massive liability. You'd overheat. You'd slow down, your body temperature would spike, and you'd collapse before catching the beast you were chasing. And then you'd die hungry, which from an evolutionary standpoint is the worst possible outcome. So, over hundreds of thousands of years, we gradually lost our fur and developed something better. An absolutely crazy amount of sweat glands. Humans host approximately 2 to 4 million sweat glands on their bodies. This is more than almost any other animal on the planet. We remain, without hyperbole, supreme sweating machines. Expert level, world-class liquid emitters. If there were contests for perspiring, we would dominate every division. This is great in the summertime. It is considerably less great when it's 40 below zero and you're trying to survive in Central Asia with nothing but your mind and a rock. And that's where outfits come in. Eventually, warmth was likely not the primary reason. Likely. Here's the traditional story. Humans moved out of Africa, hit colder regions, got cold, wrapped themselves in animal skins, and that's that. Simple, neat, logical. A 5-year-old could figure it out. Except the timeline doesn't quite fit. And once you notice that, the whole neat narrative starts to unravel. Genetic evidence, which we'll get into in about 30 seconds, suggests that mankind started wearing clothes somewhere around 100,000 to 170,000 years ago. The issue is that modern humans didn't really start migrating out of Africa in massive numbers until around 70,000 years ago. So, if clothes were merely a response to freezing weather, why are they appearing tens of thousands of years before humans actually went anywhere cold? Something else must have been happening much earlier. Something cultural. Something that has more to do with who we are as a species than with the temperature outdoors. But, before we dive into that, we need to speak about the most unlikely piece of evidence in the entire clothing origin tale. And yes, it's the lice. We're doing the lice now, the louse that changed everything. Scientists at the University of Florida were doing what geneticists do, which apparently involves staring at very tiny things for extremely long periods of time, and occasionally having a breakthrough that alters everything. And they decided to chart the evolutionary history of human lice. Now, Here's the vital piece of biology you need to understand. Humans host two main types of lice: head lice and body lice. Head lice live in your hair. Body lice live specifically in clothing, in the seams, in the folds, in the textiles. They are two genetically distinct groups, and body lice evolved from head lice at some specific moment in history. Here's why that matters hugely. Body lice can only survive if there are clothes to live inside. They cannot survive on bare human flesh. They require fabric. They require the warmth and shelter that clothing provides. Thus, the moment body lice genetically diverged from head lice, the moment that evolutionary split happened, is essentially the moment humans started wearing clothes consistently enough to create a new ecological niche for a parasite. When scientists ran the numbers, they found that body lice diverged from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Let that rest for a moment. A parasitic insect, one of the most universally despised creatures in human history, the pest that causes mass panic in elementary schools and ruins camping trips, accidentally preserved the earliest evidence of human fashion. The lice knew when we got dressed before we did. They were present. They evolved. They moved inside. This is either beautiful or deeply, deeply horrifying. Perhaps both simultaneously. Likely both. So, what were clothes actually for initially? Alright, so we've verified that clothing predates the migration out of Africa by a significant margin, which means warmth cannot be the original catalyst. So, what was? Theory number 1. Basic physical protection. Not from cold, but from sun, insects, sharp vegetation, and general abrasion. If you're spending your hours trekking through tall grass and thorny scrubland, hunting animals across rocky terrain, a simple wrap or loincloth made from animal skin creates a meaningful barrier between your flesh and things that want to scratch, bite, or sting it. It's not fancy. It's not philosophically fascinating, yet it likely kept early humans significantly more comfortable and reduced infections from small cuts and wounds. Sometimes the dull answer is the correct one. Hypothesis number 2 is where it gets genuinely interesting: social signaling. Humans are, at our core, profoundly social creatures. We are consumed with hierarchy in a manner that goes bone deep. We are constantly, compulsively broadcasting who we are, what group we belong to, what status we hold, whether you should be scared of us, or attracted to us, or deferential to us. We do this with our posture, our facial expressions, our voices, our hairstyles, our tattoos, and quite possibly from very early on, with what we drape over our bodies. There's proof that our ancestors were using pigments like ochre for body decoration as far back as 200,000 years ago. That's before the lice evidence for clothing. Thus, the impulse to decorate the body to signal something visually about yourself to the group, that might actually be older than clothing itself. We were painting ourselves before we were dressing ourselves. The leap from decorating your skin to wearing a specific kind of hide in a specific way isn't a huge mental jump. And once the hide is on, you start thinking about which hide, and how it's worn, and what that communicates. Is this the pelt of something powerful? Did I slay it myself? Does wearing it say something about me? Welcome to the very first fashion industry. Population: a small band of Homo sapiens on the African savanna arguing about who gets to wear the leopard skin. Needles, awls, and the creation of tailoring. For most of early human history, apparel probably looked rough. A skin draped over the shoulders held in place with a cord made of twisted sinew, maybe crudely cut along the edges with a stone flake. Practical, awkward, the prehistoric equivalent of wearing a trash bag. Gets the job done, but nobody's winning any trophies. But then, around 50,000 years ago, something shifts in the archaeological record. Researchers start finding bone needles. Not merely pointed tools for punching holes, actual needles with tiny eyes bored through them, clearly designed for threading sinew or fiber and stitching material together with precision. Fitted clothing, sewn seams, garments shaped to the body rather than just thrown over it. The oldest confirmed needle with a proper eye was found in Denisova Cave in Siberia and dates back approximately 50,000 years. It was crafted from the hollow bone of a bird, shaped and polished to a fineness that is genuinely extraordinary. This artifact represents a cognitive leap that is difficult to overstate. Someone looked at a sliver of bone, envisioned a tool that didn't yet exist, figured out how to bore a clean hole through the narrow end without splitting it, and used the finished product to join two pieces of material with a controlled, repeatable stitch. That is not survival instinct. That is engineering. That is design thinking. That is someone solving a problem through imagination and craft, rather than brute force. And that needle matters more than almost any other object from that period, because you can live without pottery, you can live without cave paintings. In Siberia, 50,000 years ago, in the depths of a glacial winter, without properly fitted clothing that seals heat against the body, you absolutely cannot. The Neanderthals were doing it too. Here's something that often gets dropped from the clothing origin story, mostly because it complicates the neat modern humans invented everything narrative. Neanderthals were also making and wearing clothes, and they were doing it well before they ever encountered us. We've unearthed significant proof of Neanderthals systematically processing animal skins, scraping bones in patterns consistent with pelt preparation, using specific stone tools that were clearly intended for working leather, and handling carcasses in ways that imply they were after the hide as much as the meat. There's also genetic and bodily proof indicating Neanderthals possessed physical adaptations for frigid climates, stockier frames, shorter limbs, varying fat distribution, which shows us they were battling with intense cold for a very long period. Garments would have been mandatory, not optional. And then there are the Denisovans, the enigmatic third human lineage we only uncovered in 2010 from a single finger bone located inside that same Siberian cavern. Within the exact archaeological layers as the needle, scientists discovered pierced and polished ornaments that imply symbolic thinking, decoration, and possibly clothing embellishment. A population we barely knew existed were already caring about what they were wearing and how it appeared. Thus, the urge to dress the body wasn't exclusive to our lineage. Various human species in different environments reached very similar solutions through overlapping logic, which sparks a genuinely unsettling question. Is clothing a human thing, or is it a smart bipedal primate living inside a harsh environment thing? Is it unavoidable? Would any sufficiently intelligent creature, freezing enough and social enough, ultimately figure out that wrapping yourself in something is just obviously correct? We don't know. However, the convergence across species is very tough to ignore. Let's take a step back and speak about the truly weird detail here. The factor that separates human clothing from every other animal's relationship with shelter or protection. If garments were purely practical, every society across history would converge on the most thermally efficient solution for their climate, and just remain there forever. Thick pelts in the Arctic, light plant fiber in the tropics, identical shapes, identical function, total standardization, finished. That is categorically not what occurred. What occurred is that humans immediately and universally made apparel mean something. Within every culture we have records of, going back to the earliest archaeological evidence, apparel carries symbolic weight that goes far beyond its physical function. Clerics wore different things than warriors. Leaders wore things nobody else was allowed to wear. The deceased were buried in specific garments suited for their status and the journey ahead of them. Rituals demanded specific dress that would be absurd in any other situation. Several of the oldest textile fragments ever found weren't just pieces of fabric. They were colored in multiple hues. Someone, tens of thousands of years ago, stared at a perfectly functional piece of woven material and thought, this needs to be a different shade. Not because it would keep them warmer, but because it would mean something different, because it would express something. This is the fundamental strangeness of human clothing. We use it like language. We use it to construct and broadcast identity. We use it to say, I belong to this group. I hold this rank. I am grieving. I am rejoicing. I am dangerous. I am available. I am holy. I am normal. No other creature does this. Peacocks display, certainly. Cuttlefish change color, yet they're not deciding what to communicate based on social context, cultural history, and personal narrative. That's entirely ours. And it started, as best we can tell, in Africa between 1 and 200,000 years ago, when some ancestor of ours picked up a piece of ochre, painted themselves with it, and felt something click into place about who they were in relation to everyone else. Even if warmth wasn't the original reason, it became a survival-critical one fast. Between roughly 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, Earth went through a series of brutal freezing cycles. Global temperatures plummeted. Ice sheets expanded dramatically. Huge portions of Africa became hyper-arid. Lakes dried out. Food sources vanished. The human population might have crashed to somewhere between 10 and 30,000 individuals at its lowest point. We nearly went extinct. We came shockingly close to just not existing anymore as a species before we'd even gotten properly started. For the survivors, and especially for the groups that eventually pushed north into Europe and east into Central Asia over the following millennia, apparel was no longer a social signal or a practical comfort. It was the thin line between living and dying. Quite literally, the tribes that had already developed sophisticated clothing technology, fitted, layered, stitched, sealed at the extremities, had a survival advantage so significant it's hard to overstate. A properly constructed garment traps warm air against the body. It protects the wrists and neck, the places where blood runs close to the surface, and heat escapes fastest. It enables a human body to survive temperatures that would kill an unclothed person in hours. Those with the needle, the thread, the knowledge of how to prepare hide and layer materials, they made it through. They had children. Those children learned the same skills. And those skills carried forward across generations are part of the reason modern humans made it to every continent on Earth. We didn't just evolve bodies suited for the world. We built a second skin and carried it everywhere we traveled. There's a transition in the clothing story that often gets glossed over because it doesn't have a single dramatic moment attached to it. The shift from animal skins to woven plant fibers. Animal pelts are warm, durable, and water-resistant. They're also heavy, stiff, difficult to clean, and you need to kill something to get them, which is a logistical constraint. At some point, humans started working with plant fibers, spinning them into thread, twisting them into cord, eventually weaving them into fabric. The oldest known twisted plant fiber was discovered inside a cave in the Republic of Georgia, the country, not the state, and dates to roughly 30,000 years ago. Crucially, those fibers were dyed in multiple colors, already decorative, already purposeful, already communicating something beyond simple function. By the time of the Neolithic agricultural revolution, roughly 10,000 BCE onwards, textile production had become a core technology of human civilization. Flax cultivation for linen, wool from domesticated sheep, eventually cotton, silk, and the extraordinary variety of fibers that different cultures developed independently across the world. And with textiles came something genuinely revolutionary, the wardrobe. Clothing that could be specialized for different purposes. A heavy cloak for winter, a light wrap for summer, specific garments for ritual, for work, for status, for mourning. Clothing as a system of expression rather than a single object of survival. The textile industry, long before the Industrial Revolution made it mechanical, was one of the most significant economic and cultural forces in the ancient world. Entire trade routes were built on it. Empires were financed by it. Wars were fought over access to the raw materials for it. Silk alone reshaped the political geography of half the world. All of this from a cold, naked primate with clever hands and a piece of bone. So, why did ancient humans start wearing clothes? The honest answer is for all the reasons, in overlapping waves, driven by biology and culture and climate and social complexity all at once. It probably started with practical protection, something between the skin and the thorns and the sun and the biting things. It evolved almost immediately into social signaling, a way of saying something about who you are in a world full of other people making constant judgments about you. It became a survival technology when the climate turned hostile and the migrations began, and it became an art form, an industry, a language, and an identity as human culture grew more complex. The remarkable thing isn't that we started wearing clothes. Given who we are, social, symbolic, status-obsessed, freezing half the time, it was probably inevitable. You are doing that right now. Whatever you're wearing, you made choices, conscious and unconscious ones, about what to put on your body today. And those choices reflect something about who you are, how you feel, what group you belong to, what image of yourself you're presenting to the world. You are doing exactly what that person on the African savannah was doing, wrapped in ochre-stained hide, figuring out how to signal something about themselves to the people standing around the same fire. 150,000 years of human history, and what connects you to them directly, without interruption, is the simple fact that you got dressed this morning. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. We get cold, we get creative, we get dressed, and then we spend the rest of our lives complaining that we have nothing to wear. Some things genuinely never change. Our shared human journey truly remains fascinating. Our ancient past teaches us profound truths regarding survival. Thank you for reading this tale. Keep dressing yourself proudly.